hot picks in biotech, and honestly, there hasn't been a lot that's been hot in biotech, save for maybe the Eli Lilly and the Novo Nordisk of the world. Some areas of the market haven't rallied as much, and so generally that biotech sector has underperformed the S&P 500. To talk about the current environment and the best bets out there, let's bring in Robert Moffat, who's a portfolio manager at Middlefield. Robert, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me back.
So it's kind of Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk world and everything else. How are you parsing through some opportunities?
Yeah, so I do think that the best opportunity right now is in biotech. You just showed a chart that shows that the biotech index has underperformed not just the S&P, but it has lagged the healthcare sector as well. So I do think there's a good opportunity for a catch-up trade and some better relative performance. Really, biotech came on the scene in the late 90s and the early 2000s with the advent of antibodies and proteins and biologics, which are basically large molecules that can be targeted at specific cancer cells or autoimmune disorders or rare diseases. So before that, it was all about chemicals and pharmaceuticals. I think the future and over the next decade is going to be more and more of these biologics and large molecules coming to market. So biotech is the place to be.
Okay, so let's talk about how we play that. Regeneron is your first idea, and honestly, it hasn't fared as poorly as maybe some of the other larger pharmaceuticals, to your point. What's the play here? What's the growth?
Yeah, so if you look at the 5-year chart of Regeneron, for example, that stock has done quite well. It just kind of continues to grind higher up and to the right. I think that's based on two main things. So the first is the commercial portfolio that they have in existence right now. So they have a drug called Eylea, which came out about 12 or 13 years ago, which is over $10 billion a year today. And they have another drug called Dupixent, which is used to treat asthma. It just got approved for COPD, which is a respiratory disease in Europe this morning. And that's today about $12 billion and looks like it's going to $20 billion over the next 4 or 5 years. So there's a really solid double-digit earnings growth story embedded in the existing portfolio. And then the reason that Regeneron has done so well and I think trades at a bit of a premium to its peers is that it has arguably the best R&D platform in the entire biotech sector. Very well regarded and respected management team. In fact, the CEO has been, I think he's the third longest serving CEO in the S&P 500 right now. Really a company that has proven its expertise in developing antibodies and biologics. And when you look at the pipeline, they have a number of exciting cancer drugs. They even have a drug in obesity, which is actually for muscle preservation. But
which is great because that's the knock on the current lineup of drugs.
That's right. And if history is any indication, this is an R&D platform and a management team that you should invest in.
Is it too big to get taken out? Is that an absurd thought?
So I think that, and if you listen to how management team presents themselves, I don't think they're interested in selling out. Like, they believe in their internal capabilities. Regeneron spent a much higher percentage of their revenue on R&D than basically anyone else. Over 30% of sales spent on R&D last year. So they're taking their free cash flow, reinvesting it in the business. That's not really a kind of company that is for sale, in my opinion.
AbbVie is your second pick. It's also held up pretty well. It seems like it addresses a number of treatment areas.
Yeah, so AbbVie is what I would describe as more of a diversified biotech company, large cap, pays a big dividend that grows every year. So you do get some of that more defensive and diversified characteristics from AbbVie than you would with Regeneron. In the near term, AbbVie is going through a few issues. So 2 years ago, they had the #1 selling drug in the entire world called Humira, biologic to treat Crohn's disease, arthritis, a number of different autoimmune disorders. And then Humira lost exclusivity, lost its patent protection in 2023. So the revenue from 22 to 24 is being cut in half over just a 2-year period. So right now in 2024, we're going through a bit of an earnings trough where Humira revenues are declining significantly. But what I think is perhaps underappreciated and why I like AbbVie over the next 5 years is that the next generation of autoimmune drugs that they have, specifically they're called Skyrizi and Rinvoq, those are drugs that are going to more than offset the lost revenues from Humira's patent cliff. And AbbVie also acquired Allergan back in 2019, and they have Botox, which is growing quite nicely. So AbbVie, if you look past the near-term headwinds of Humira losing exclusivity, and you kind of take a more longer-term perspective, which is why the stock has done well. I think AbbVie is a great, clean growth story at a pretty reasonable multiple. At about
I think that's
times.
a good point, and it reminds me of like looking at an Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk. You know that this is only for a period of time, right? The growth, the exclusivity, having the patents, and so I imagine a large part of your analysis is who are these people and what can they allocate to next, and when you invest, do you feel like you're getting a good sight line into that?
So, I mean, Regeneron and AbbVie have very different capital allocation strategies. As I mentioned, Regeneron puts a lot of money into R&D. They're kind of a homegrown platform, whereas AbbVie has in the past been more acquisitive. They do more business development, and they've been quite successful. The Allergan is a good example, but just last year they made a $10 billion and an $8 billion acquisition. They've announced a couple of smaller deals this year. So it's a little tougher to get line of sight into what that's going to look like versus organic R&D pipeline, because you're getting updates throughout and you're kind of watching it. But, it's been a proven strategy that's successful for AbbVie, and they do more BD, which is great. I mean, there's two ways to grow the pipeline, and that's a great way too.
Amgen is your third pick. Is this also in part a dividend play?
So Amgen is definitely a dividend play. I think it's about 3% dividend yield today. Similar to AbbVie in that its core business is diversified. I think they have 7 different drugs that are over $1 billion a year in sales. But really the story with Amgen right now is actually in obesity and GLPs. So I think that Amgen is most likely to be the third to market in the GLP space. They have a phase 2 trial that's going to be reading out before the end of this year. It is a GLP similar to Novo and Lilly's drug, but it does have a slightly different mechanism in that it's a GIP antagonist. So without getting into the science, it's a little bit differentiated, but
So an injection?
It is still an injection, and it's possible, we need to see the data still, but it's possible that it'll be a larger interval between doses. So you could maybe do every couple weeks or every month versus the once weekly, which is on the market
And not
today.
fully captured in the stock?
Well, I would say it's partially captured in the stock. If phase 2 data is positive, there's no question Amgen goes higher, but we'll see.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Robert Moffat joining us at Middlefield. Thanks so much for watching on Trading Day.